By torchlight in a sealed chamber, a queen watched breath slow and eyes glaze, not in rage, but in study. Cleopatra did not need armies to kill, she needed answers. Each dose was measured, each scream noted, each silence recorded. In a world where power ended in poison, she sought mastery over death itself, testing fate on the voiceless while Rome closed in and time ran out. The door closed, the air thickened, and history held its breath as the experiment began. This was not legend yet, only a choice made in shadow, written before witnesses could speak. Fate leaned closer, no mercy followed.
Don't forget to subscribe and click on notifications. Write your opinion in the comments on which stories you prefer. You will find more stories on the channel. Cleopatra VII Philopator ruled at the edge of extinction. Egypt was no longer the invincible kingdom of pharaohs, but a prize contested by Roman warlords who spoke of alliance while sharpening knives. From childhood, Cleopatra learned that survival required knowledge denied to others. She studied languages, law, astronomy, and medicine, but above all, she studied power, how it entered the body, and how it could leave it. In Alexandria, where Greek science mixed with Egyptian ritual, poison was not merely a weapon, it was a science and a statement. The royal court preserved traditions that outsiders found unsettling. Ancient texts described venoms distilled from plants, minerals, and animals, cataloged with effects that ranged from swift sleep to prolonged agony. Cleopatra inherited these archives, along with a throne that was never secure. Rivals within her own family had been eliminated quietly for generations. To rule was to understand death intimately, not as spectacle, but as procedure. Accounts from later Roman writers claim that Cleopatra tested poisons on condemned servants and enslaved people, observing which substances killed quickly and which prolonged suffering. These stories emerged from hostile sources, written by men eager to reduce a formidable queen to a monster. Yet they persisted because they echoed a deeper truth about the era. Human life at the margins was expendable, and rulers everywhere used the powerless to refine the tools of survival. Within the palace laboratories, preparations were meticulous. Substances were dissolved, blended, and weighed. Doses were adjusted by age, strength, and health. Scribes recorded outcomes with clinical detachment. The goal was not cruelty for its own sake, but certainty. Cleopatra sought a death that could be chosen, controlled, and trusted if capture became inevitable. Rome humiliated defeated enemies, parading them through streets before execution. She would not endure that fate. The queen's fascination with poison also reflected the political reality of her court. Daggers were obvious, but poison left no battlefield, no heroics, only results. Banquets could become executions, wine could become verdict. In such an environment, understanding toxins was a form of armor. Knowledge offered a shield where steel could not. Cleopatra's enemies later framed these experiments as evidence of depravity, yet Roman leaders themselves employed poison without hesitation. What distinguished Cleopatra was not the act, but the attention she gave it. She approached death as a scholar, cataloging its variations. To her, ignorance was the true danger. Ancient Egyptian belief had long treated death as a passage rather than an end, but Cleopatra lived in a harsher age. Her father's weakness had invited Roman intervention. Her siblings had conspired against her. Exile had taught her how quickly legitimacy evaporated. Poison promised control in a world where control was slipping away. Stories circulated among courtiers about silent trials conducted at night away from public eyes. Whether exaggerated or accurate, they reveal how Cleopatra was perceived by those around her: calculating, observant, unwilling to leave her fate to chance. Mercy was a luxury rarely afforded to monarchs under siege. Roman propaganda later seized upon these rumors, transforming methodical preparation into sadism. The queen became a figure of decadent excess, her intelligence reframed as cruelty. This distortion served a purpose. By portraying Cleopatra as unnatural, Rome justified conquest as moral necessity rather than political ambition. Yet even through hostile accounts, a consistent image emerges. Cleopatra believed knowledge could bend destiny. If she were to die, it would be on her terms, swiftly, without spectacle. Every test, every record was aimed toward that single assurance. Thus, the laboratory stood as a paradox of her reign, a place where human vulnerability was measured so that royal dignity could be preserved. The cost was borne by those without names, whose lives intersected history only as data. Their suffering became footnotes, while the queen's resolve became legend. As Egypt's independence narrowed to a thread, Cleopatra continued to rule with precision. She negotiated, seduced, and commanded fleets, all while preparing for the moment when none of it would be enough. Poison waited, perfected, patient, a silent companion to power.
Cleopatra's relationship with Rome deepened even as her autonomy eroded. Julius Caesar's arrival in Alexandria had restored her throne, but it also placed Egypt under a permanent shadow. Roman legions did not leave easily, and Roman allies rarely remained equals. Cleopatra understood that alliance was only another word for delay. Every favor bought time, and time was the most precious resource she possessed. Within the palace, the queen refined her preparations. Poison was no longer an abstract safeguard, but part of a broader strategy of control. The court was a place of constant threat, where loyalty shifted with rumor and opportunity. Cleopatra observed how fear traveled faster than orders, how whispers could undo armies. She ruled not by terror, but by anticipation, staying several steps ahead of betrayal. Ancient medical knowledge flourished in Alexandria, home to scholars who dissected bodies and recorded the mechanics of life. Cleopatra drew upon this tradition, consulting physicians and alchemists who understood the effects of substances on flesh and breath. Their work blurred the line between healing and harm. A medicine at one dose became a weapon at another. The queen demanded precision, insisting on outcomes that could not fail. Roman sources later described her as obsessed with finding a painless death. This fixation, they claimed, revealed decadence and moral decay. Yet such interpretations ignored Roman customs themselves. Defeated rulers were often strangled in prisons after public humiliation. Cleopatra's concern was not indulgence, but dignity. She refused to become a spectacle. The use of enslaved subjects in experiments reflected the brutal hierarchy of the age. Their lives were already considered expendable by the state. Cleopatra did not invent this cruelty, she inherited it. Still, her deliberate observation transformed accepted practice into something more unsettling. Death was no longer an accident or punishment, but a variable to be studied. As her relationship with Caesar ended in assassination, the political landscape shifted violently. Cleopatra mourned, but she did not hesitate. She aligned herself with Mark Antony, a man of appetite and ambition who saw in her both a partner and a symbol. Together, they challenged Rome's future, even as Rome prepared to crush them. Antony's presence brought new urgency to Cleopatra's preparations. Defeat was no longer hypothetical. Roman civil war meant that victors would be merciless. Cleopatra increased her studies, narrowing her focus to venoms that acted swiftly. Time mattered, seconds mattered. She sought certainty where chaos ruled. Court gossip painted her as a sorceress, manipulating life and death with unnatural ease. These stories traveled beyond Egypt, feeding Roman imagination. The image of Cleopatra as an Eastern temptress, dangerous and decadent, gained strength with each retelling.
Truth became irrelevant, perception became weaponized. Cleopatra herself remained composed. Publicly, she appeared radiant, hosting feasts and ceremonies that reinforced divine authority. Privately, she prepared for endings. She reviewed records, questioned physicians, adjusted mixtures. Each revision reflected a ruler who refused to surrender agency, even in defeat. Her children represented another layer of calculation. Cleopatra knew that Roman mercy rarely extended to heirs. The laboratory thus served not only personal resolve, but dynastic protection. If capture meant annihilation, she would deny Rome the satisfaction of conquest. The palace at Alexandria became a place of dual realities. Music echoed through halls where experiments were planned. Incense masked the scent of chemicals. Life and death coexisted, inseparable, each sharpening the other. Cleopatra stood at the center, orchestrating both with unwavering focus. As Rome closed in, the queen's preparations reached their final form. The question was no longer whether she would need them, but when. Poison was not her obsession. It was her last argument against humiliation, her refusal to let history write her ending alone.
As Octavian's power consolidated in Rome, Cleopatra's options narrowed to ritual and resolve. The war that would decide her fate moved inexorably toward Egypt, and with it came a narrative written by her enemies before the first sword was drawn. She was no longer merely a queen, but a symbol Rome intended to destroy. Every rumor amplified her otherness, every exaggeration served a purpose. In this climate, truth lost its utility, only outcomes mattered. The defeat at Actium shattered the illusion of parity. Fleets burned, alliances collapsed, and Antony's confidence unraveled under the weight of failure. Cleopatra watched the balance tip with cold clarity. Emotion could not alter strategy. She returned to Alexandria and sealed herself within preparation, transforming palaces into fortresses and laboratories into final refuges. It was during this period that accounts of poison testing grew darker. Roman chroniclers would later claim that she compared deaths with dispassionate interest, judging not morality but efficiency. Whether these depictions reflect reality or propaganda, they reveal the fear she inspired. A ruler who refused to beg, who studied her own extinction, threatened Rome's narrative of dominance. Cleopatra's court physicians reportedly evaluated combinations of plant toxins and animal venoms, seeking an end that would be swift and controlled. Pain was not the measure, certainty was. She rejected substances that produced prolonged suffering, not out of mercy, but because unpredictability undermined purpose. The ideal poison was silent, reliable, and absolute. This pursuit intersected with ancient Egyptian concepts of divine kingship. Pharaohs were not meant to be paraded or humiliated. Their deaths were rituals of transition. Cleopatra, though Macedonian by blood, embraced this legacy. Her preparations echoed burial rites in reverse. Instead of preserving the body for eternity, she sought to preserve dignity at the moment of collapse. Antony's descent accelerated events. His attempts to negotiate with Octavian failed, and his despair infected the court. Cleopatra, however, remained focused. She secured her children's futures as best she could, sending them away where possible, knowing Rome's mercy would be selective at best. Her laboratory became a sanctuary of last decisions. As Roman forces approached, Cleopatra staged one final performance of power. She appeared in public, adorned as Isis, reinforcing her divine association. This was not vanity, but defiance. If Rome intended to reduce her to spectacle, she would dictate the terms of her image until the end. Behind closed doors, preparations reached completion. The poisons were chosen,
their effects understood. The experiments, whatever their number, had served their function. Knowledge replaced uncertainty. Cleopatra no longer feared capture as an unknown. She had prepared an answer. Roman writers later fixated on these moments, framing them as evidence of decadence and cruelty. They ignored the context that produced them, a world where rulers were trophies and humiliation was policy. Cleopatra's choices reflected the logic of survival under empire, not personal depravity. As Octavian entered Egypt, Cleopatra's reign narrowed to hours. She had lost armies, allies, and leverage, but not agency. The queen who had studied death would not allow Rome to choreograph her final act. The laboratory doors closed. History waited.
The final hours of Cleopatra's reign unfolded without witnesses Rome could command. Octavian sought to capture her alive, to parade her through the streets as proof that even queens could be reduced to ornaments of victory. Cleopatra understood this intention clearly. She had watched Roman triumphs before. She knew how power displayed humiliation as entertainment, how dignity dissolved beneath applause. When Antony was gone, the illusion of negotiation vanished with him. Cleopatra withdrew from public life entirely. The palace that had once dazzled ambassadors now became silent, sealed against intrusion. Servants moved carefully, aware that history was narrowing to a single decision. Outside, Roman banners approached, symbols of an empire that consumed everything it touched. The queen's final preparations were calm. No panic marked her movements. Everything had already been decided. The poisons she had studied, refined, and tested represented more than escape. They were a declaration that her body would not belong to Rome. Control over death became her last sovereign act. Later Roman accounts described her end with theatrical embellishment, transforming certainty into spectacle. The truth mattered less than the message. Rome needed Cleopatra remembered as exotic, dangerous, and morally corrupt, so that conquest appeared righteous. Her knowledge of poisons became proof of depravity rather than foresight. Yet beneath the propaganda, a different image persists. Cleopatra was a ruler facing annihilation, using the only tools left to her. She did not seek suffering, she sought closure. The stories of testing poisons on enslaved people remain among the darkest shadows of her legacy, reminders of a world where power was preserved at the expense of the powerless. They cannot be erased, only understood within the brutal logic of survival that defined ancient rule. With Cleopatra's death, Egypt ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. Octavian absorbed it into Rome, its wealth fueling an empire that would dominate the Mediterranean. The queen's body vanished, but her image endured, reshaped endlessly by those who inherited the victory. What remains unsettling is not merely the act of poison testing, but the reason behind it. Cleopatra lived in a system that rewarded domination and punished weakness without mercy. Her preparations reflected a refusal to submit, even when submission was inevitable. Knowledge became resistance. Choice became defiance. The unnamed victims of those experiments faded into silence, their lives reduced to whispers beneath the weight of legend. Their suffering exposes the cost of monarchy under siege, where power at the top demanded sacrifice below. Cleopatra's intelligence secured her fame, but it also bound her to moral compromises that history continues to judge. In the end, Cleopatra denied Rome the ending it desired. She did not beg, she did not kneel, she closed the final door herself. The queen who had studied death ensured that it would answer to her one last time.